My dad texted, "We've changed all the locks. The key you have is useless now. We think it's time you stood on your own 2 feet. You don't have a home here anymore. You're not welcome. Let's see how tough you are now." I just stared at the glowing screen in the dark. They thought this was the kill shot. They thought they had finally broken me, that I would show up on the porch begging and crying. But 2 days later, my phone rang. It wasn't my dad. It was their lawyer, Mr. Sterling, and his voice was trembling with absolute panic. "Mason, we have a problem. A very serious problem. Please call me back immediately." They thought they were kicking me out into the street. They didn't realize they had just handed me the keys to destroy their entire fraudulent empire. Before I tell you exactly how I turned the tables and legally took half of everything they owned, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. It is always amazing to see how stories like this connect people from all over the country. The screen of my phone cast a cold, harsh blue light across my dark bedroom. The time was 11:27 p.m. on a Tuesday. I remember the exact minute because I had been staring at the ceiling, trying to unwind my brain after a brutal 14-hour shift as a data analyst. My job is to find patterns in chaos, to make sense of millions of scattered data points. Little did I know, my own family was about to become the most chaotic and deceptive dataset I would ever have to analyze. When the phone buzzed on my nightstand, I reached for it with heavy arms. I expected a late-night email from my boss, maybe an automated server alert. The notification was a text from my father, Robert. My dad is not a man of many words. His texts are usually logistical commands or one-word answers. But this was different. This was a final judgment, delivered with the cold efficiency of an executioner. I read the words once, my exhausted brain struggling to process the sheer cruelty of them. "You're not welcome. Let's see how tough you are now." Felt like reading a foreign language. I read them a second time, and the meaning crashed into me like a physical blow. Every single word was a carefully chosen weapon. A normal person would have spiraled. A normal son would have felt panic, disbelief, a desperate need to call and ask what he did wrong. And for a split second, I felt that vertigo. The house they were talking about, the one I was currently locked out of, was less than 10 miles away. My bed was there. My clothes were there. 10 years of my hard-earned money were poured into the foundation of that house. But then something else took over. It was a strange, terrifying calm, the kind of absolute, dead silence you find at the very center of a raging hurricane. For years, I had been treading water in an ocean of obligation, guilt, and subtle manipulation. I had gotten so used to the feeling of drowning that I had forgotten what it felt like to stand on solid ground. That text message wasn't a storm. It was a lighthouse. It wasn't an attack. It was an answer. My thumb, which had been hovering over the call button, moved to take a screenshot instead. The quiet click of the shutter was the most definitive sound I had ever heard in my 28 years of life. I saved the image to a hidden folder on my cloud drive. A folder labeled simply, "Evidence." They expected me to shatter. I knew exactly what was happening at that exact moment. My parents, Robert and Catherine, were probably sitting in their renovated living room, phones in hand, waiting for the inevitable hysterical phone call. They wanted tears. They wanted begging. They wanted to see me broken to prove their ultimate power over me. I decided right then and there to deny them that satisfaction. I put my phone on silent, turned it face down on the nightstand, and closed my eyes. The crushing weight that usually sat on my chest, the constant worry about their bills, their happiness, their never-ending financial emergencies, was gone. In its place was a cold, hard stone of certainty. For the next 48 hours, I gave them absolutely nothing. No calls, no texts, just a deafening psychological silence. Let them sweat, let them wonder. And on the morning of the third day, as I was calmly drinking my coffee, my phone lit up with an unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. A minute later, the transcription popped up. It was Mr. Sterling, their bulldog lawyer. He didn't sound like a bulldog anymore. He sounded like a man who had just realized he stepped on a landmine. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my black coffee, letting the warmth spread through my chest. "Oh, Mr. Sterling, you have absolutely no idea what kind of problem you have. To really understand how a father could send a text like that to his own flesh and blood, you have to rewind. You have to go back to the very beginning to see how the toxic roles in my family were forged in iron. I had mistaken exploitation for family love for 20 years. We lived in a picture-perfect house in a quiet, middle-class suburb. From the street, we looked like the ultimate American dream. Robert, my dad, was a respected manager at a logistics firm. Catherine, my mom, was a homemaker who baked for the neighborhood bake sales. And they had 2 sons. Julian, my younger brother, the golden child, the athlete, the dreamer. And then there was me, Mason. I was the tool. My apprenticeship in family servitude began when I was 14 years old. While my friends from middle school were discovering video games, going to the movies, and enjoying their summer breaks, I was standing on a rickety aluminum extension ladder with my dad, learning how to scrape peeling paint and spackle hairline cracks in the siding of our house. My father was a harsh, unforgiving teacher. Everything had to be perfect or I had to do it again. "Measure twice, cut once, Mason," he would bark, a phrase permanently burned into my brain. If I dropped a tool, he would shake his head in disgust. But when a grueling weekend job was finally done, he would wrap a heavy, sweaty arm around my shoulders and beam with pride. "Look at that," he'd say loudly to my mom, who would be watching from the porch with a glass of iced tea. "The boy is a natural. He's got my work ethic. He's the solid pillar of this family." Those words were my paycheck. I chased that meager approval like a starving dog chasing a scrap of meat. So I worked, every weekend, every summer vacation. My friends would be heading down to the lake, and I would be on my hands and knees routing the bathroom tile until my fingers bled. They would be going to football games, and I would be snaking the main sewer drain because it was clogged with tree roots again. I remember one particularly miserable afternoon when I was 15. We had a severe pipe leak in the crawl space under the house. It was a dark, damp, claustrophobic nightmare infested with spiders and smelling of rotting wood. My dad, citing a sudden flare-up of his bad back, handed me a heavy flashlight and a bucket of industrial sealant. "You're smaller, you'll fit in there better," he told me, pushing me toward the vent opening. "Be a man about it. Do this for the family." I spent 6 agonizing hours on my belly in the freezing mud, patching a leaking cast iron pipe while spiders literally crawled over my neck and hands. I was terrified, freezing, and exhausted. When I finally emerged, covered head to toe in toxic-smelling filth and violently shivering, my mom handed me a cheap paper towel from the kitchen. "Oh, you poor thing, look at this mess you made on the grass," she said, her voice dripping with mild annoyance rather than concern. "Go wash off outside with the hose before you come in. Julian just scored 2 goals at his soccer game today. We're ordering his favorite pizza to celebrate." There was no thank you. There was no acknowledgement of the disgusting, back-breaking job I had just done to save them hundreds of dollars in plumbing fees. My labor was as expected and as invisible as the turning of the earth. It was simply my function. Julian's function was to be celebrated. My function was to do the dirty work that kept his perfect world intact. Mrs. Higgins, our sweet, eagle-eyed elderly neighbor, saw it all. She would often find an excuse to come over with a plate of fresh cookies while I was in the middle of some miserable project in the blazing sun. I remember her looking at me, her face pale, a deep sadness in her eyes. "You work so hard for them, Mason," she would say softly. I thought she was complimenting me. I didn't realize until much later that she was looking at me with pure pity. She wasn't seeing a helpful, dutiful son. She was seeing a child laborer being exploited by his own parents. I was being conditioned. Every drop of sweat, every blister, every weekend lost was grooming me for the real job they had planned for me. I just didn't know it yet. The transition from physical unpaid labor to absolute financial support was so seamless I didn't even feel the trap closing around my ankle. It happened when I was 21. I had just graduated from a local state college, which I paid for entirely by myself working night shifts, and landed my first real job as a junior data analyst. I I finally had a salary. A modest one, but it was mine. Or so I thought. 2 weeks after my first paycheck cleared, my parents called a family summit at the kitchen table. The atmosphere was thick with manufactured gloom. My mother was sitting there, dabbing at her dry eyes with a crumpled tissue. My dad sat at the head of the table, his shoulders slumped, staring at a stack of official-looking papers under the harsh fluorescent light. "Mason," my dad started, his voice heavy with rehearsed defeat. "You're a man now, a working man, and with that comes adult reality. Your mother and we're in trouble." He pushed a paper with a bank logo toward me. It looked like a foreclosure warning. "I miscalculated," he lied smoothly. "The company froze bonuses. The medical bills from your mom's minor surgery last year piled up. We are 3 months behind on the mortgage. The bank is threatening to take the house." My mother let out a loud, theatrical sob. "This house is our whole life, Mason. It's the only legacy we have to leave you and your brother. If we lose it, we have nothing. We'll be out on the street." I was 21 years old. I was naive, deeply conditioned to protect them, and completely terrified at the thought of my family being thrown out of their home. The thought of Julian, who was just starting college, having his childhood home ripped away from him made my chest tight. "How much?" I asked, the words tumbling out of my mouth before my brain could process the math. "How much do you need?" The relief on their faces was instantaneous. The gloom vanished so fast it gave me whiplash. My dad reached across the table and gripped my hand hard. "You're a good son, Mason. The best son a man could ask for. Listen, this is just temporary. Just until I get my promotion next year and get us back on solid ground. And remember, this isn't just rent. This house is our ultimate investment. It's your inheritance. You're building equity for your own future." The word inheritance hung in the air. It was a powerful, intoxicating hook. They weren't asking for money. They were inviting me into a partnership. Or so I believed. That night, we sat down and went through my entire salary. We calculated exactly how much I needed for gas and cheap groceries. The rest, a staggering 60% of my take-home pay, was set up as an automatic bank transfer from my checking account directly into theirs, scheduled for the first of every month. I was officially the bank. That temporary arrangement didn't last a year. It lasted for 7 long, grueling years. The years blurred together in a haze of long office hours, skipped vacations, and automatic transfers. I never moved out. How could I? I was literally paying the mortgage on the house I was sleeping in, but it never felt like mine. I couldn't afford to rent an apartment because my entire financial output was keeping my parents' roof over their heads. I was a hostage paying for his own ransom. But as the years went on, the math stopped making sense. My dad got a promotion. My mom started selling crafts online. Yet the emergencies never stopped. The water heater blew. The property taxes went up. And every single time, Robert would pull me aside, put that heavy hand on my shoulder, and look at me with tired eyes. "Just a little extra this month, Mason. For the family." And I paid it. I drained my savings. I let my student loans gather interest. I sacrificed my 20s on the altar of their financial instability. The crack in the foundation, the moment the illusion began to shatter, happened on a sunny Saturday afternoon when I was 28. I had been working insane, 80-hour weeks for 6 months straight to secure a senior analyst promotion at my firm. When it finally came through, it included a massive year-end bonus. For the first time in my adult life, I had a chunk of real money. My immediate plan was to take that check and finally wipe out the crushing student loan debt that had been suffocating me since graduation. I felt like I could finally breathe. That same weekend, my family threw a massive backyard barbecue to celebrate Julian's 24th birthday. Julian had graduated a year prior with a degree in communications and had spent the last 12 months living rent-free in the basement, talking endlessly about a tech startup he was going to launch. The backyard was full of neighbors, relatives, and Julian's frat friends. I was manning the grill, sweating through my shirt, serving burgers while everyone else drank cold beers. Suddenly, my dad clinked his glass with a fork. The yard went quiet. He was standing on the back deck, the same deck I had spent 8 days sanding and staining by hand 3 summers ago. Catherine was standing next to him, beaming. "Everyone, gather around," Robert boomed, his chest puffed out. "As you all know, our boy Julian is officially launching his new company next week. A CEO needs to look the part. He needs to show his investors he means business. So, your mother and I decided to make a little investment of our own." He pointed toward the driveway. Julian's friends started cheering. I put down the metal tongs and walked over to look. Sitting in the driveway, gleaming in the afternoon sun, was a brand new, midnight blue Porsche Macan. It wasn't a used sedan. It wasn't a sensible commuter car. It was a luxury sports SUV that cost more than I made in 2 entire years. Julian ran over, screaming, and hugged my parents. People clapped. My stomach physically dropped. I felt a wave of nausea so intense the edges of my vision went dark. A Porsche. My parents, the people who just last month told me they couldn't afford the skyrocketing electric bill, had just bought a Porsche for my brother. I backed away from the crowd, my hands shaking. I walked into the empty kitchen to catch my breath. The air conditioning kicked on, but I was burning up. Aunt Sarah, my mother's sister, stumbled into the kitchen a moment later to refill her wine glass. Aunt Sarah had recently gone through a bitter, messy divorce and a nightmare custody battle, which left her constantly cynical and brutally unfiltered, especially after 2 glasses of Chardonnay. "Quite the show out there, huh?" she slurred, leaning against the granite counter. "A Porsche. Unbelievable." "Yeah," I managed to say, my throat tight. I didn't know they had that kind of cash. Aunt Sarah let out a harsh, barking laugh. "Oh, please, Mason. Don't play dumb. They have cash because they don't have a mortgage payment. Catherine bragged to me last Thanksgiving. She said having you in the house was the best financial decision they ever made. You cover the boring bills so they can fund the fun stuff." She took a long sip of her wine, oblivious to the fact that she had just ripped my heart out of my chest. "Honestly, Mason, you're a saint. If I had a kid who blindly handed over his paycheck every month so I could buy a luxury car for my other kid, I'd build him a shrine." She patted my cheek with a cold hand and walked back outside. I stood in that kitchen for 20 minutes, completely paralyzed. The world tilted on its axis. The heavy, suffocating truth crashed down on me. There was no foreclosure. There was no financial ruin. I was not a partner building equity. I was a human shield. I was a walking, breathing ATM. My parents had weaponized my love, my loyalty, and my fear of homelessness to fund an extravagant lifestyle for the son they actually valued. The promotion bonus sitting in my bank account suddenly felt like a joke. The final shred of my denial was violently ripped away by my best friend, Elijah. Elijah wasn't just a friend. He was the brother Julian never was. He was sharp, observant, and brutally honest. A few weeks after the Porsche incident, Elijah came over to my house to watch a Sunday football game. We were sitting in the living room. It was the 3rd quarter, a tied game. Suddenly, Robert walked in, stood directly in front of the TV, and pointed a finger at me. "Mason, the dishwasher is making that grinding noise again. Go pull it out from the wall and check the motor pump. Now, before it floods the hardwood." It wasn't a request. It was an order, delivered with the tone of a master speaking to a servant. Before I could even stand up, Elijah leaned forward on the couch. "Mr. Robert, it's the 4th quarter. It's a tie game. The dishwasher can wait 20 minutes. My dad didn't even look at Elijah. He kept his eyes locked on me. "In this house, we take care of our property. Mason knows his responsibilities." "Right, Mason." The conditioning was so deep, so ingrained in my bones, that I actually stood up. I walked into the kitchen, got on my hands and knees in my clean clothes, and started unscrewing the greasy kick plate of the dishwasher while my dad went back to his office. Elijah didn't watch the game. He came into the kitchen, leaned against the doorframe, and watched me work. He didn't say a word, but his silence was deafening. It was heavy with judgment and pity. When the game ended, Elijah insisted we leave immediately. The moment the doors of his car slammed shut, he turned to me, his face red with anger. "I'm going to be blunt because I care about you," Elijah said, his voice shaking. "What I just watched in there was sick. You are a 28-year-old senior analyst. You pay their mortgage. And your father just whistled for you like a dog to fix an appliance while your brother is out joyriding in a Porsche you probably indirectly paid for." I tried to defend them. The instinct was automatic. "It's my house too, Elijah. I'm helping the family. It's my inheritance." "Inheritance?" Elijah laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "Is your name on the deed, Mason? Have you ever seen the title to that house?" "No," I whispered. "You don't have a family," Elijah said softly, hitting the steering wheel. "You have an employer. You are a business, and you are the only employee who doesn't get a paycheck. You need to wake up before they bleed you dry and leave you with nothing." I drove home that night in a daze. It was raining hard, the kind of cold, relentless downpour that matches a dark mood. A mile from the house, my front tire hit a massive pothole, and the tire blew out. I had to change it in the freezing rain. By the time I finally pulled into the driveway, it was past midnight. I was soaked to the bone, shivering, and covered in road grease. I let myself in through the side garage door as quietly as possible. The house was dark. I assumed everyone was asleep. But as I walked down the carpeted hallway toward the stairs, I heard voices coming from the kitchen. Low, urgent, excited voices. I stopped. I pressed my back flat against the cold drywall of the hallway and held my breath. It was Robert, Catherine, Julian, and a fourth voice I didn't immediately recognize. "Mr. Grayson," my dad was saying, "you really think we can list it that high?" Grayson, the real estate agent whose face was on half the bus benches in our town. "Absolutely, Robert," Grayson replied confidently. "The market is scorching hot right now. And with the upgrades you've done, the hand-stained custom deck, the new plumbing, the master bathroom tile work, this place is a premium listing. We can list for $650,000, and I guarantee we'll get a bidding war up to $700,000. My heart stopped beating. $700,000. They were selling the house. They were using the exact upgrades I had done with my own two hands, the materials I had paid for, as selling points to maximize their profit. "That's wonderful," my mother practically squealed. Her voice was giddy, laced with greed. "That's more than enough. We can buy the luxury condo down in Florida in cash, and still have a massive cushion for Julian's company." Then Julian spoke up. "What about Mason? When are you going to tell him he has 30 days to pack up? He's going to freak out. He thinks he owns part of this place." I squeezed my eyes shut. I waited for my mother to defend me. I waited for my father to say they were going to give me my fair share, to honor their promise. Instead, my mother let out a sharp, cruel laugh. "Mason is a big boy. He makes a good salary. He'll rent a little apartment. Legally, every dime he's ever given us is a gift. His name isn't on the deed, it isn't on the mortgage. He has absolutely no legal claim to a single penny of this sale. We are completely in the clear." "Exactly," Robert agreed. "He's strong. Let him learn how the real world works. We owe him nothing." I didn't shed a single tear. The sadness evaporated, instantly replaced by a rage so cold and absolute it felt like ice water in my veins. The son they knew died in that hallway. The person who walked silently up the stairs and closed his bedroom door was no longer a victim. I was an auditor, and it was time to balance the books. The next morning, I walked downstairs, poured a cup of coffee, and smiled at my mother as she made eggs. "Good morning," I said cheerfully. "You look nice today, Mom." She beamed back at me, completely unaware that she was looking into the eyes of a dead man. I started living a double life. By day, I was the perfect, oblivious son. I went to work. I paid the internet bill. I asked Julian how his startup was going. But the moment they went to sleep, my bedroom transformed into a forensic accounting war room. I called it Project Reclamation. My laptop was my weapon, and my data analysis skills were my ammunition. I created a master Excel spreadsheet. I logged onto my bank portals and pulled a decade of transaction history. I spent hours night after night scrolling through thousands of lines of data. I tagged every single electronic transfer that went from my account to Robert and Catherine. I categorized them: mortgage, utilities, property taxes, emergency plumbing, emergency roof repair. The numbers grew at an alarming, sickening rate. I was building a monument to my own blind loyalty. But digital records of transfers weren't enough. They could argue I was just paying rent. I needed proof of their deception. I needed the emails and the texts. I searched my archives for keywords: help, urgent, foreclosure, bank, ruin. Hundreds of messages popped up. I read every single one. I saved them as PDF files, numbering them chronologically. Exhibit 14. Text from Robert demanding $2,000 for property taxes, claiming the city was going to put a lien on the house. Exhibit 32. Email from Catherine crying about the broken HVAC system in the middle of winter. It was a sickening, undeniable paper trail of emotional extortion. But I needed physical proof of the labor I provided, the physical equity I had built into the property. When Robert went golfing on Saturdays and Catherine went to her book club, I conducted stealth raids on their home office. I found old, faded receipts from Home Depot for thousands of dollars in lumber, tile, and plumbing supplies, all paid for with my credit card. I photographed everything. Then I reached out to Wyatt. Wyatt was a buddy from high school who now owned a highly successful general contracting business. I met him at a diner on a Tuesday night. I slid a heavily detailed list across the table: the custom deck, the master bathroom gut and remodel, the total crawlspace plumbing overhaul, the roof patching. "Hey man," I said, keeping my voice level, "I need a favor. Can you look at this list and draft me a formal, professional estimate on company letterhead? Tell me exactly what you would charge a client for this labor and material." Wyatt read down the list, his eyebrows rising higher and higher. He looked at me, shocked. "Dude, you did all this by yourself? On nights and weekends? Just give me the number, Wyatt." He emailed me the official invoice the next day. The total, with a friends and family discount applied, was $45,800. Just in labor. I added that PDF to my hidden folder. My next stop was Mrs. Higgins. I walked across the street and found her tending to her rose bushes. I felt a knot of guilt for dragging this sweet woman into my family's toxic mess, but I needed her. I sat with her on her porch, and I told her everything. I told her about the mortgage, the Porsche, the conversation I overheard in the hallway. I didn't spare the ugly details. Mrs. Higgins didn't interrupt. When I finished, she reached out and squeezed my hand with surprising strength. "Mason," she said, her voice trembling with indignation. "For 15 years, I have watched them treat you like a rented mule. I heard your mother bragging at a block party once about how she never had to hire a painter because she had you trained so well. I will gladly swear to that in a court of law. I will tell the judge exactly what I saw. I had my data. I had my expert witness. I had my character witness. I had a loaded weapon. Now I just needed to find their secret stash of ammunition." The opportunity to strike gold presented itself in the most mundane way imaginable. A week later, Catherine, caught up in a frenzy of pre-moving spring cleaning, decided the attic needed to be cleared out. "Mason, honey," she called up the stairs on a Saturday morning, "I need your muscle. There are some heavy old boxes up in the attic. Be a good boy and drag them down to the curb for the trash." "Sure thing, Mom," I replied. The attic was a stifling, dusty, forgotten landscape of family history. I hauled old Christmas decorations and boxes of Julian's old sports trophies toward the stairs. As I was moving a heavy, water-stained steamer trunk tucked deep into the shadows of the eaves, I noticed a loose floorboard. I pushed the trunk aside and lifted the board. Underneath it was a sleek, modern, gray metal fireproof lockbox. It was completely out of place among the decades of junk, and it was locked tight with a heavy padlock. My pulse began to hammer in my ears. People don't hide sentimental photo albums in a fireproof lockbox hidden under a floorboard. They hide secrets. I waited until I heard my parents' car pull out of the driveway to go grocery shopping. I took the box down to my bedroom and locked the door. Years of being forced to fix broken locks and rusty hinges had taught me a few tricks. I grabbed 2 heavy-duty paper clips and a small flathead screwdriver. I felt like a spy in a cheap movie, my hands sweating as I fumbled with the mechanism. After 5 tense minutes, I felt the pins catch. Click. I popped the lid open. The contents weren't flashy at first glance. Just thick manila folders, neatly labeled. But the labels made the breath catch in my throat. Fidelity Investments. Bank of America Premier Savings. Apex Startups LLC. I pulled out the Bank of America file first. It was a statement from exactly 2 months ago. I scanned past the account numbers, my eyes searching for the bottom line. Ending balance, $132,450. The number swam before my eyes. I blinked hard. Over $130,000 in liquid cash. While Catherine was crying theatrical tears at the kitchen table about being 3 months behind on the mortgage. While Robert was taking 60% of my junior analyst salary. They had a massive fortune sitting in a premium savings account. The foreclosure threat was a total, calculated, psychopathic lie. I felt a wave of nausea so violent I had to sit down on the floor. I wasn't just helping them survive. I was funding their secret wealth accumulation. I frantically tore open the next folder, Apex Startups LLC. I read through the incorporation documents. Julian was listed as a 10% minority partner. Robert and Catherine owned 90%. I flipped to the asset declaration page for the LLC. There it was, listed as a primary company vehicle for executive transport. A midnight blue Porsche Macan. They didn't just buy him a car. They bought the car through a shell company to write off the depreciation on their taxes, hiding the asset completely. They were financial masterminds, and I was the idiot Mark funding the entire operation. Every remaining ounce of familial love, duty, or hesitation I had was instantly incinerated. The mother and father I thought I knew were dead to me. They were con artists. I laid every single document out on my bed and photographed every page. But I hadn't even found the worst of it yet. I created a new subfolder in my encrypted cloud drive. I named it the smoking gun. But as I started reviewing the transaction histories on the Bank of America statements I had just photographed, a chilling pattern began to emerge from the data. I am a data analyst. My brain is wired to find correlations. I opened my Excel spreadsheet, the one detailing every payment I had ever made to them, and placed it side by side on my monitor with the photos of their bank statements. I started matching dates. On October 12th, 3 years ago, I transferred $4,200 to Robert. He had texted me in a panic, claiming the roof was leaking into the guest bedroom and the contractor needed a cash deposit immediately or the house would suffer massive water damage. I drained my emergency fund to send it. I looked at their Bank of America statement for October of that same year. There was no $4,200 withdrawal for a roofing contractor. Instead, on October 14th, exactly 2 days after I sent the money, there was an outward transfer of $4,000. I traced the routing number printed next to the transaction. It led to another account listed in the folder. I opened that document. It was a Charles Schwab investment account. The title of the account was the Julian Future Fund. My blood ran completely cold. Couldn't breathe. I traced another date, April 5th. I paid $2,500 to replace the main sewage line. April 7th. A deposit of $2,500 was made directly into the Julian Future Fund. August 20th. I transferred $1,800 to cover skyrocketing property taxes. August 22nd. A deposit of $1,500 into the Julian Future Fund. The pattern was flawless. It was a direct pipeline. Whenever my parents wanted to pump cash into Julian's investment portfolio, to set up the golden child for a life of luxury and ease, they would invent a catastrophic emergency, terrify me into handing over my hard-earned salary, and funnel my money directly into his account. I was literally financing my brother's future at the expense of my own existence. They weren't just exploiting my labor. They were actively, maliciously stealing my future to give it to him. I sat in my dark room, the glow of the monitors reflecting off my face. The betrayal was so deep, so absolute, it transcended anger. It became a sharp, razor-focused obsession. I didn't want an apology anymore. I didn't want my money back. I wanted to burn their fraudulent empire to the ground and salt the earth so nothing could ever grow there again. I carefully packed the documents back into the lockbox, snapped the padlock shut, and buried it exactly where I found it in the attic. They had no idea there was a venomous snake living inside their walls, and I was just waiting for the perfect moment to bite. I didn't need a family therapist. I needed an assassin in a three-piece suit. I spent a week interviewing lawyers until I found Carter. Carter was a high-end, ruthless civil litigator who specialized in complex financial disputes and asset recovery. His office was on the 40th floor of a downtown skyscraper, all glass and polished steel. He didn't offer me tea or a sympathetic smile. He offered me a shark-like grin. I sat across his massive mahogany desk and handed him a thick, indexed binder containing every photograph, every Excel sheet, the quote from Wyatt, and the printed text messages. Carter spent 45 minutes reading through the binder in complete silence. The only sound was the ticking of a ridiculously expensive clock on his wall. When he finally closed the binder, he looked at me, his eyes gleaming with professional predatory excitement. "Mason," Carter said, leaning back in his leather chair, "I have seen a lot of ugly family disputes involving divorce, funerals, and bitter custody battles over inheritances. But this is a masterpiece of financial fraud. You don't just have a case. You have a nuclear bomb. Can we sue them for the money back?" I asked, my voice flat. "Oh, we can do much better than that," Carter smiled. "They've relied on the fact that your name isn't on the deed. But they've left a massive paper trail of promises. They told you the money was an investment. They told you it was for your inheritance. In the legal world, we call this unjust enrichment and promissory estoppel. You acted to your own detriment based on their explicit promises. Furthermore, we have proof they commingled those funds to hide assets." "So what's the play?" "The play," Carter said, leaning forward and steepling his fingers, "is to wait. Right now, you are a tenant paying bills. We need them to commit the final act of aggression. They want to sell the house for $700,000 and flee to Florida. Let them try. We wait until they formally attempt to sever the relationship and kick you out. The moment they pull the trigger, I file an emergency injunction to freeze the sale of the house, freeze their bank accounts, and demand a partition of the property. We will legally force them to surrender 50% of the total equity to you." "Half?" I asked. "Half, plus legal fees. But Mason, listen to me." Carter's voice turned deadly serious. "You have to be a ghost. You go home, you eat dinner with them, you smile. You give them zero indication that you know anything. Let their arrogance grow. Let them think they hold all the cards." So I went back into the lion's den. I sat at the dinner table across from the people who had stolen my youth. I listened to Robert pompously lecture me about hard work paying off. I watched Catherine politely ask me to pass the salt while secretly plotting to leave me homeless. I smiled. I nodded. I was completely hollow inside, but I played my part perfectly. I knew exactly what was coming. I knew they were planning to list the house next month. I knew they would try to get rid of me first. I smiled during those final dinners, knowing full well it was the last free meals they would ever get out of me. The gun was loaded. The safety was off. I was just waiting for Robert to step into the crosshairs. And then, on a Tuesday night at 11:27 p.m., my phone buzzed with a text message. "We've changed all the locks. Let's see how tough you are now." I read the text, forwarded a screenshot directly to Carter's personal email, and typed a 3-word reply to my lawyer. Carter didn't hesitate. The moment I sent that 3-word email, the gears of the legal machine slammed into motion. It was Wednesday morning. While I was sitting at my desk at the office, drinking a terrible cup of breakroom coffee and running a routine data model. A process server was walking up the manicured front walkway of my childhood home. I wasn't there to see it, but Carter had a colleague observe the delivery. Robert answered the door in his bathrobe, expecting a package. Instead, he was handed a thick stack of legal documents. It was a formal petition for partition of the property, accompanied by a lawsuit for unjust enrichment, fraud by inducement, and a judge-approved emergency injunction that immediately froze the title of the house and all of their known bank accounts. By noon, my phone became a war zone. It started with a call from Robert. I watched his name flash on the screen, the phone vibrating violently against my desk. I let it ring. Then came Catherine. 2 missed calls. Then Julian. Then a text message from Robert that simply read, "Call me right now. This isn't funny." It wasn't funny at all. It was justice. Then came the message from Aunt Sarah. Aunt Sarah, who had dragged her own ex-husband through a brutal divorce and a venomous custody battle just a few years prior, suddenly fancied herself the family's moral compass. Her text was a masterpiece of manipulation. "Mason, I don't know what kind of mental breakdown you are having, but suing your own parents? After everything they sacrificed to raise you, you are breaking your mother's heart. Call off your attack dog lawyer and come home to apologize." I didn't reply. I went into my phone settings and blocked Robert. I blocked Catherine. I blocked Julian. I blocked Aunt Sarah. I blocked every single relative who might try to guilt me into surrendering. Carter had given me one strict instruction: absolute, impenetrable silence. Let them panic. Let them realize the boy who used to fix their toilets was now holding the deed to their financial ruin. That Friday, we met for the court-ordered emergency mediation. It took place at the law offices of Mr. Sterling, their attorney. The conference room was designed to intimidate. It smelled of lemon polish and expensive leather. A massive mahogany table dominated the space. Carter and I arrived early. I wore a charcoal suit I had bought for a friend's funeral 2 years ago. I felt entirely numb. When the heavy double doors opened, my family walked in. They looked like they hadn't slept in days. Robert's face was a mottled, angry red. He practically stomped into the room, pulling out his chair with unnecessary force. Catherine followed, clutching a tissue, her eyes darting nervously around the room. Julian sauntered in last, wearing a designer polo shirt, looking more annoyed than concerned. Mr. Sterling walked in behind them, carrying a thin manila folder. He looked confident, clearly believing he was dealing with a disgruntled kid throwing a tantrum over rent money. No one said a word as they sat down across from us. Robert locked eyes with me. His jaw muscles were ticking so hard I could see them flexing under his skin. He wanted me to look down. He wanted me to cower. I held his gaze, my face a complete blank slate. Mr. Sterling cleared his throat and opened his thin folder. "Gentlemen, we are here to resolve a highly emotional family dispute. My clients are deeply distressed by this aggressive and, frankly, baseless legal action. Mason, your parents love you, but filing a lawsuit claiming ownership of a property you have merely been paying rent to live in is absurd. We are prepared to offer you a return of your last 2 months of rent to help you secure a new apartment, provided you drop this lawsuit today." Robert slammed his hand flat on the table. The sound echoed like a gunshot. "He doesn't deserve a dime," Robert barked, pointing a thick finger at me. "We put a roof over his head. We fed him. This is the ultimate betrayal. He brings a shark lawyer in here to try and steal his own parents' retirement? You are no son of mine." Catherine pressed the tissue to her face and let out a dramatic, wavering sob. "Mason, how could you do this to us? I have cried every night. The stress is going to kill your father. We just wanted you to learn responsibility. We promised you an inheritance one day, but you got greedy." Julian leaned back in his expensive leather chair, crossing his arms. "Seriously, bro, you're acting insane. Nobody forced you to fix the deck. Nobody forced you to do the plumbing. You liked doing that stuff. You said it was a good workout. Now you want to charge them for a hobby." The betrayal stung, but it didn't paralyze me like it used to. It just confirmed everything I already knew. Julian was actively participating in the lie to protect his own lifestyle. Carter let them finish. He let the silence stretch for 10 uncomfortable seconds. Then he smiled. It was a cold, terrifying smile. "Are you finished?" Carter asked, his voice smooth and dangerously quiet. He reached down to his briefcase and pulled out 2 massive 3-inch thick binders. He dropped the first one onto the mahogany table. It hit the wood with a heavy, satisfying thud. "Mr. Sterling," Carter began, not looking at my parents, but directly at their lawyer. "You claim my client was paying rent. Yet, we have 7 years of bank records showing payments that fluctuate wildly, directly correlating with text messages and emails from your clients begging for emergency funds to stop a fictitious foreclosure. We have documentation establishing a clear, continuous pattern of fraud by inducement." Sterling frowned, adjusting his glasses. "Families help each other with bills, Mr. Carter. That does not equate to equity." "You are correct," Carter nodded smoothly. "But families usually don't lie about being bankrupt to steal from their own children." Carter opened the second binder. He pulled out a high-resolution, color-printed document and slid it across the polished wood. It stopped directly in front of Robert. "Can you identify this document, Robert?" Carter asked politely. Robert looked down. All the color instantly drained from his face. The angry red vanished, replaced by a sickly, chalky white. His mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. Mr. Sterling leaned over to look. It was the Bank of America Premier Savings Statement, the one showing the $132,450 balance. Sterling's eyes widened behind his glasses. He looked at his clients, completely blindsided. "Robert, what is this? You told me you had 0 liquid assets." Before anyone could speak, Carter slid a second document across the table. "And this?" Carter's voice grew louder, harder. "This is the incorporation document for Apex Startups LLC, a company owned 90% by Robert and Catherine and 10% by Julian. The primary asset of this company is a midnight blue Porsche Macan, purchased in cash. During the exact same month, Robert texted Mason claiming they couldn't afford the electric bill." Julian sat up straight, his face suddenly looking very young and very scared. "Wait, you guys put the car in a company name?" "They hid it, Julian," Carter snapped. "They hid it from the IRS, and they hid it from the son who was actually paying for it." Catherine stopped fake crying. She was staring at the documents on the table with genuine, wide-eyed terror. The illusion was shattered. The mask was off. "But the absolute best part," Carter said, pulling out the final spreadsheet, "is the Julian Future Fund." Carter read the dates and the amounts aloud. His voice was like a hammer hitting a nail over and over again. He read my emergency transfer of $4,200 for a broken roof, followed by the $4,000 deposit into Julian's investment account 2 days later. He read the plumbing emergency transfer. He read the property tax transfer. He linked every single one of their lies directly to the funding of the golden child's nest egg. "You didn't just accept help," Carter said, looking directly into my mother's eyes. "You weaponized his love for you. You turned your oldest son into an unpaid laborer and an interest-free, involuntary investment bank to fund a luxury lifestyle for your youngest son." The silence in the room was absolute. It was the silence of a tomb. Sterling rubbed his forehead. He looked at my parents with absolute disgust. He was a lawyer who defended messy family disputes, but he didn't like being lied to by his own clients. He knew he had walked into an ambush without a weapon. Carter closed the binder. The snap of the metal rings sounded like a prison door locking. "So here is the deal," Carter said, leaning forward on his elbows. "We have the text message Robert sent explicitly kicking Mason out of the house. That establishes the formal severing of the arrangement. We have the financial records. We have the fraud. We are offering you one chance to settle this quietly. You will immediately sign over 50% of the total equity of the house. We will list it for sale next week. Mason takes his half and you walk away. If you refuse, we go to trial. We subpoena the LLC. We expose the tax fraud on the vehicle. I will drag all three of you into a public courtroom and ensure you leave with absolutely nothing. Robert looked at the table. Catherine was shaking. Julian was staring at his parents like they were strangers. Mr. Sterling, Carter said softly, I suggest you confer with your clients. This is the moment that changes everything, the moment I finally took back control of my life. Thank you so much for your patience and for staying with me until now. You've been amazing. Please give this video a like and comment one below to let me know you've made it this far. Not only does this help more people find this story, but it also lets me know that my experiences truly mean something to someone. Your support is my greatest motivation to keep sharing the rest of this journey. The mediation didn't last much longer after that. Mr. Sterling asked us to step out of the room. We stood in the hallway for exactly 12 minutes. When we were called back in, Robert's signature was already on the settlement agreement. They surrendered. They gave up half the equity of the house without a fight because they were terrified of the criminal implications of their hidden accounts. I watched Robert sign his name, his hand visibly shaking. But as I walked out of that office, clutching a legally binding document that guaranteed me hundreds of thousands of dollars, I didn't feel the massive wave of joy I expected. I just felt an exhausting, bone-deep hollow sensation. The war was won, but the battlefield was my own family. In the weeks that followed, while the real estate agent prepared the house for the market, the psychological warfare continued. My parents couldn't fight me in court, so they fought me in the shadows. Aunt Sarah became their lead general. She started calling every aunt, uncle, and cousin we had. She spun a tragic, twisted narrative. She told everyone that I had gone crazy, that I was a greedy, heartless corporate drone who hired a sleazy lawyer to extort my poor, aging parents and force them out of their beloved home. I started getting angry messages on Facebook from cousins I hadn't spoken to in years. I was uninvited from a family wedding. I was painted as the ultimate villain. They were trying to destroy my reputation to salvage their own bruised egos. I realized then that a legal victory wasn't enough. Carter had won the money, but I had to win my peace. I had to sever the emotional umbilical cord permanently. I reached out to Catherine and Robert. I told them I would meet them one last time at a generic coffee shop in a strip mall 2 towns over. Neutral ground. They arrived looking defensive and exhausted. They sat across from me in a cheap plastic booth. Robert wouldn't look me in the eye. Catherine immediately reached across the table to try and hold my hand. I pulled my hand away and placed it in my lap. Mason, she started, her voice trembling. This has gone too far. The house is listed. You're getting your money, but you can't abandon us. We are blood. You can't just throw your family away over a misunderstanding. It wasn't a misunderstanding, I said. My voice was calm, completely devoid of anger. It was a 10-year heist, and I'm not here to negotiate. I pulled a thin folder out of my jacket and slid it across the table. It was a copy of the Apex Startups LLC documents, the ones proving the Porsche was a hidden asset. Tell Aunt Sarah to shut her mouth, I said. Robert looked up, his eyes narrowing. What? You heard me. You tell Sarah to stop calling the relatives. You tell her to stop posting about me. If I get one more angry message from a cousin, or if I hear my name in her mouth one more time, I will take this folder directly to the IRS. I will report the LLC for tax evasion. I will name you, Catherine, and Julian as co-conspirators. You will spend the money from the house sale fighting federal tax evasion charges. Catherine gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. You wouldn't do that to your brother. Try me, I said, leaning in. You spent my entire life teaching me that family is just a business transaction. Well, consider this a hostile takeover. You fired yourselves as my parents a long time ago. I'm just finally accepting the resignation. I quit. I stood up from the booth. I didn't wait for an answer. I didn't look back to see their reaction. I walked out of the coffee shop, the bell above the door jingling cheerfully. I walked to my car, got in, and took a deep breath. The air tasted different, tasted clean. For the first time in 28 years, I was completely, absolutely free. 2 months later, the house sold. The real estate market was desperate, and a young couple bought it for slightly over the asking price. When the title company finalized the paperwork and the bank cleared the funds, I opened my banking app on my phone. I stared at the screen for a solid 10 minutes. Available balance, $319,450. It didn't look like a real number. For my entire adult life, my bank account had been a place of constant anxiety, a battlefield where I fought to keep the balance above zero after the first of the month. Now it was a fortress. It was my back pay. It was the price of my stolen youth. I didn't go out and buy a luxury watch. I didn't buy a Porsche. I called a man named David, a highly recommended, conservative financial advisor. I sat in David's office and laid out my life. He didn't judge me. He helped me build a wall around that money. We paid off the remainder of my student loans in one massive, incredibly satisfying lump sum. We maxed out a retirement account. We locked a large portion into safe, diversified index funds. And we set aside exactly enough for a 20% down payment on a home. My home. The house hunting process was a revelation. Every time I walked into an open house, I wasn't looking at cracked drywall or leaky faucets as a list of chores I would be forced to fix for someone else's benefit. I was looking at potential. I found a small, beautiful townhouse in a quiet neighborhood lined with old oak trees. It had a small backyard with enough space for a garden, and a living room that flooded with natural morning light. The day I closed on the property, the lawyer handed me a single brass key. I drove straight there, unlocked the front door, and stepped inside. The house was completely empty. The hardwood floors echoed under my shoes. I sat down right in the middle of the empty living room floor and just listened to the silence. It was the most beautiful sound in the world. That weekend, Elijah and Wyatt came over. They brought rollers, drop cloths, and 3 gallons of a warm gray paint I had picked out myself. We spent the entire Saturday painting the living room and the kitchen. Nobody yelled at me if I dripped a drop of paint on the baseboard. Nobody told me I was doing it wrong. We played loud music, told terrible jokes, and when we were done, we ordered 2 large pepperoni pizzas and sat on the floor drinking cheap beer. I looked at Elijah and Wyatt laughing across from me. I realized then that family isn't determined by blood. Family is determined by respect. These guys respected me. They protected me. They were my family now. Over the next few months, I slowly turned that empty townhouse into a home. I bought a comfortable couch that I actually wanted. I planted tomatoes and basil in the small backyard. I discovered a profound, quiet joy in watering those plants every morning, watching something grow simply for the sake of growing, not because it served a purpose for anyone else. In the process of finally unpacking the last few boxes I had brought from my old bedroom, I found the small, gray fireproof lockbox I had taken from the attic. I had emptied out my parents' financial documents for the lawyers, but I had left the small wooden box inside, the one labeled, Mom's Keepsakes. It belonged to my grandmother, Rose. She had passed away when I was in high school. I had loved her deeply. She was a soft-spoken woman who always smelled like peppermint and lavender. I opened the wooden box. It was filled with sepia-toned photographs and an old dried corsage. At the bottom was a thick bundle of letters tied with a brittle blue ribbon. They were letters my grandmother had written to her sister, my great-aunt Margaret, back in the late 1980s, right around the time my parents were newly married. I sat on the floor of my home office, the afternoon sun warming my back, and carefully untied the ribbon. The cursive handwriting was elegant and fading. I read the first few letters. They were normal, updates on the weather, recipes. But then, a letter dated from 1987 caught my eye. Margaret, my grandmother wrote. Catherine called again today crying. She and Robert are having trouble making the car payment. She sounded so desperate, saying Robert might lose his job if he can't drive to the site. Of course, your father and I sent them the money. What else could we do? She's our daughter. My heart gave a heavy thump. I opened the next letter, dated 1988. I'm afraid we've made a terrible mistake with Catherine. Every time they want something, a new sofa, a vacation, a new crisis suddenly pops up that only we can solve. Frank is starting to call it the Catherine Emergency Fund. It hurts me deeply to think she might be taking advantage of our love. My hands started to tremble. I grabbed a letter from 1989, the year my parents bought the house I had just forced them to sell. "Dearest Margaret," the letter read, "the new house is lovely, but I have a terrible feeling in my stomach. We gave them almost all of our retirement savings for the down payment. Catherine swore up and down it was a temporary loan, that they would pay us back as soon as Robert's promotion came through. But now, when I bring it up, she gets so incredibly angry. She cries and accuses me of not trusting her, of loving money more than my own child. She has a way of twisting things that makes me feel like I am the one being cruel. I look at my daughter, Margie, and sometimes I feel like I'm looking at a complete stranger. A very clever, very demanding stranger. I worry who she will turn to when we are gone." I put the letter down on the hardwood floor. The air in the room felt perfectly still. It wasn't just me. It had never been just me. I wasn't the first victim. I was just the sequel. My mother was not the architect of this manipulative scheme. She was its inheritor. She had learned at a young age how to weaponize love, how to monetize guilt, how to treat her own parents as an endless resource to be drained. And when her parents passed away, when that well ran dry, she and Robert simply looked around for a new resource. They passed the pattern on to the next generation. They cast Julian in the role of the entitled beneficiary, the one who deserved the world. And they cast me in the exact role my grandmother had played, the endlessly loving, endlessly exploitable bank. It didn't forgive their actions. It didn't erase the years of backbreaking labor in the crawlspace, or the panic attacks over my bank balance, or the sting of the Porsche in the driveway. But it explained the pathology. This was a sickness. It was a generational curse passed down through my family like a dark, twisted heirloom. Sitting there in my own quiet house, a house bought and paid for on my own terms, a profound sense of peace finally washed over me. My fight hadn't just been about getting my money back. It had been about breaking a cycle that had plagued my family for decades. My grandmother had been trapped by her unconditional love for her daughter. She couldn't say no, but I had been given a gift. I had been given the gift of their ultimate arrogance. That text message kicking me out had pushed me so far past the brink that I had no choice but to pick up a sword and cut the chain entirely. In doing so, I hadn't just saved myself. I had honored the quiet pain of the grandmother who had suffered before me. The cycle stopped with me. It was dead. It has been over 2 years since I walked out of that coffee shop and left them sitting in the booth. My life is quiet now, in the absolute best possible way. I still work hard at my job, but when I clock out, my time belongs to me. I don't dread my phone ringing. I don't flinch when a text message comes through. I never hear from them directly. I made sure of that. But sometimes, small pieces of news filter through the grapevine via friends of friends. Julian's tech startup collapsed spectacularly 6 months after it launched. He had no work ethic and no idea how to manage the money they pumped into it. Without my salary to cover the hidden LLC costs, the Porsche was repossessed. Robert and Catherine took their half of the house sale and moved down to Florida, just like they planned. But without me to subsidize their lifestyle, the money burned fast. They bought a condo they couldn't afford the HOA fees on. They ended up selling it at a massive loss. Last I heard, they were renting a cramped apartment somewhere in the Midwest, trying to live off Robert's modest pension. I don't feel joy in their failures. I don't sit around laughing at their misfortune. I honestly just feel nothing at all. Complete, utter indifference. They are the architects of their own misery. Every now and then, usually when the house is quiet and I'm watching the sunset from my back patio, I think about that text message. The 6 sentences that were intended to be my absolute undoing. We've changed all the locks. You don't have a home anymore. They thought they were delivering a final, crushing blow. They thought they were demonstrating their ultimate power over my life. But they misunderstood the nature of prisons. A prison isn't always a place with iron bars and guards. Sometimes, a prison is a beautiful suburban house where your value is strictly measured by your utility. Sometimes, a prison is a family where love is highly conditional, heavily taxed, and entirely dependent on your blind compliance. They didn't lock me out. They set me free. That text message wasn't the end of my story. It was the master key. It was the one act of cruelty so blatant, so legally actionable, that it gave me the absolute permission I needed to finally save myself. It shattered the illusion of family and revealed the stark, cold reality of the transaction my life had become. The greatest lesson my parents ever taught me is that a home is not made of four walls, a custom-stained deck, and a roof. A home is a place where you are safe. A home is a place where you can drop your armor. A home is a place where you are loved for exactly who you are, not for the problems you can solve or the bills you can pay. I have that now. I built it for myself. I walk through my front door every single evening. I turn the deadbolt, and the only person I have to answer to is me. I am no longer the handyman. I am no longer the emergency fund. I am no longer the stepping stone for the golden child. I am just Mason, and for the first time in my life, that is more than enough. They changed the locks on their house, but in doing so, they forced me to find the keys to my own life. And for that, in a strange, twisted way, I will be forever grateful to them. Thank you for sticking around and listening to my story. I know it was a long one, but I hope this resonated with you in some way. It's a strange and incredibly painful thing when the people who are supposed to protect you are the ones you need protection from. Have you ever found yourself in a similar situation where you had to choose between your own sanity and a toxic family relationship? I read all your comments, so please let me know down below. And if you made it all the way to the end of this video, you belong to the 1% club. Prove it by commenting the letter W for winner down in the comments. It's our little secret code so I can see who the real ones are that stayed till the very last second. Please hit that like button, subscribe, and follow the channel so we can keep sharing these journeys together. I'll see you in the next one. Stay strong.